Hello and welcome to another episode of Tech About Town, brought to you by Communitech and Elevate IP. I'm Alex Kinsella.
And I'm Rosie Del Campo.
So today we're back in the studio with another one of our Fierce Founders alumni. Alum? I always get this wrong.
Alum. Yes.
Alum. I don't have Grammarly when we do the podcast, unfortunately. It'd be so good if we did. Before I get to who it is, our guest today, a little, do a little segue, a little personal story about this. So what's interesting about our guest today is it's a preventative health startup. I recently went to my my family doctor, my GP, for the first time. I'd never actually met them because we switched family doctors over the pandemic. And we're going through a bunch of stuff. And they're like, hey, I'm really big into preventative medicine. Is it cool with you if we run a whole bunch of tests? And I love tests because I just have to sit there and donate blood, or not donate blood, but give blood, and I leave. It's great. So she goes through all the different tests, and we go through cancer histories in our families, and we go through those. So I'm like, okay, we did everything. She's like, you're not at risk for prostate cancer. You're not 50 yet. Close enough, but not 50 yet. We're going to go ahead and do a PSA test, and it's going to cost you $38. I'm like, that's fine. $38 to find out if I have prostate cancer earlier is probably a better thing. That came into my head today when we're talking about our guest, who is Shalini Gupta, the founder and CEO of Asima Health. So welcome to the studio today.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
And Shalini, you have your own personal story about going to the doctor, making a discovery, having a procedure done that kind of sparked the vision for this company. Talk to us about that.
Building on what Alex said, there are not a lot of preventative tests, especially blood tests, and I'll give you more statistics around that. But I went for an ultrasound, and I remember in 2017, through an incidental finding, they saw something in my ovary, and they said this needs more investigation, and I wasn't prepared for that at all. So I went through a bunch of tests, finally ended up getting an ovarian resection. It's called oophorectomy. And my tissue biopsy results came back borderline, which just means clinically that they didn't have enough evidence to call out whether it's cancerous or not. So just for prevention, they took the whole ovary out. And now my journey is like that of a cancer survivor without having gone through all the chemo and everything else. I have to get ultrasounds done. Initially, it was 6 months. Now it's a year. So it's not pleasant. That's when I started reading up about a lot of these screening tests, and having worked in point of care diagnostics, being a researcher, I was really surprised to see there is no blood test available. I mean, there is one for ovarian, but it's kind of non-specific, not that high performing. And to come back to Alex, PSA is one of the only 5 preventative tests which have coverage in the US. All the rest, there are 4 other types of preventative tests, which are all like invasive tests. They're not blood tests.
So what did you set out to do when you built this solution?
Right. So I was fortunate enough to be immersed in science, to be developing tools for early detection, not necessarily cancer. I was a faculty at a very prestigious institute in India. It's called the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi. It's like our MIT. So I was there in the chemical engineering department doing what any faculty does, had an experimental lab, graduate students, and we were building tools for early detection of mostly infectious diseases because that was the need for Indian context. But when I had this incident, I pivoted a little bit because the tools were agnostic to what type of molecules we were detecting. We had not a lot of knowledge on cancer, but I had good partnerships. So I started looking into this a little bit more, and we had a really nice tool. It's called impedance spectroscopy that we had been using for other kinds of, like antimicrobial susceptibility analysis and other kinds of things. So we got our hands on these DNA samples through collaboration with another institute, and a new grad student came in, and we had this tool, and I said, let's try something. Let's just throw in these DNA molecules and start seeing if we see something under the spectroscope. And after a lot of miserable, I would say, weeks of no data, like no differences between cancer and healthy samples, one day my grad student came in and said, look, I found something. It seems to be working. And so I said, you're too new. I don't trust you. So I had my postdoc and I said, why don't you try these samples and test for yourself and see if the results are reproducible. And we started seeing the same results. So it's quickly that 3-4 samples that we were using for discovery kind of started expanding into 200 plus clinical samples that we did through partnerships with biobanks and hospitals. And we started seeing some great results in terms of differences between cancer and healthy DNA. So the whole journey started from a personal story to having the opportunity to make a difference from the scientific realm of things, because I had the tools, I had the knowledge, experience, and expertise to kind of push this forward. And I was lucky enough to have good partners along the way to help me accelerate that process. And that's what we're doing at Asima. Now we're doing this more seriously and beyond just discovery, we're trying to commercialize this technology.
I always find that kind of that serendipitous thing where you're already working in, identifying or early detection of diseases. A personal thing happens to you, and then it kind of shifts your direction. Like you said, you pivoted towards this. So where are you now in the journey of the startup?
Right. So I started Asima Health, incidentally, exactly 2 years ago.
Today?
June. Yeah. Well, today's 3rd June. So it was 1st June, 2023. That's when we formally incorporated. So it's been a little over 2 years now. And the initial part was just trying to see if we can replicate the results we got in India in the Canadian context, like a new lab with the new scientists, new vendors, new samples. Are the results believable, right? So that was, after all the initial IP transfer and all of that, which took its own sweet time, we were finally able to manage all the tech transfer successfully. We have now tested more than 75 human samples in North America, still doing more. So that's what we have done. So we've kind of like de-risked the scientific side of things by saying that the assay is replicable, the results are phenomenally good. I mean, that's the feedback we get actually most often when I'm talking to people. It's too good to be true. So that taking, always as a scientist, you're always thinking, okay, this might fail. So you want to just keep testing. And that's what took me till end of last year, that's what we were doing. And now we understand the assay really well. Now the next step is taking that sample size of, let's say, 300 human samples that we have done. We want to make it 1,000. And the best way to do that is through clinical partnerships. So that's what I'm seeking at this point. We're also automating the test, because the ultimate vision is to have what we call our box, because typically these types of tests are done in labs, right? We're condensing a whole lab into a box and saying, look, we want to give this box to every clinical lab so that patients don't have to wait weeks to get the results. It becomes so integrated into routine workflows that you can just walk in to, let's say, a Life Labs, and just the way you give tests like your blood for cholesterol tests or thyroid tests, this could become another routine testing for early cancer detection. And we do have that capability of a multi-cancer detection. We've done about 15 different cancer types, and the test works beautifully across all of them.
So is that basically like right now in the testing that you're doing, you'd come in and say like the 15 different types, are you doing one test for each kind?
No. So the test works. The test doesn't have the distinguishing power to see which cancer.
Okay.
So any active solid tumor in your body, if it's there, even as early as stage 1, the test picks it up, right? And this is because we're looking at common shared biomarkers or signals across different types of cancers on the same biomarker. So let's say your DNA has some biochemical changes that happen across different cancer types. So we go in and say, look, we can pick up these changes, which are very evident from how a healthy DNA looks. But if we were to use more sophisticated technology, or that's what our competitors use, they can even go in and tell you exactly where the mutations are and so on and so forth. So we don't go into any of that because that increases cost and time and so on. We have a very, very fast, when I say fast, standard of care is 2 to 3 weeks. We are same day, so 6 to 8 hours. And that comes in with the resolution. Like we lose some resolution on the test to say which cancer, but I think that's really not a drawback, because as long as you can know whether you have cancer or not, you can get tested as a follow-on, right? There are better tests, maybe standard of care tests, more sophisticated blood tests that can do that. It's just that they've taken a long time, or they're still not clinically adopted for the common
not to be a terrible marketer, but it's like a top of funnel.
It's a top of funnel.
It's a top of funnel, and then you get down. You're like, okay, maybe you have a family history of lymphoma or ovarian cancer or whatever, and then you're like, okay, let me get this one.
Correct. And then there are various. I mean, cancer care continuum is so complex. When I got into this, I didn't even realize that there are so many sub verticals. When you say a cancer test, like people will laugh at me to say, okay, you're building a cancer test. Cancer test for what? Right? So everything is about, are you doing a diagnostic test? Are you doing a screening test? Are you doing a recurrence monitoring test? Are you looking at tumor burden? Is it for therapy selection? So there are many verticals. The underlying technology is the same. You can pivot into any direction, and pivoting into the right direction helps the commercialization side of things, getting early approvals, making your clinical trial costs go down if you make those smart decisions. And that's what I've been doing as a CEO, trying to understand, okay, we have the science, we have the technology, product can be built with more money, time, and energy. That's not a risk, but just understanding how do we get there faster and faster than anybody else. That's my role as a CEO, to understand the quickest path to get there, right? So that's all I'm learning and doing. And there are lots of nuances in this field that I'm learning as we go. Yeah.
What are you learning about the field as you look to make a decision about which direction you choose to follow?
Yeah. So I'll tell you very, very high level. Imagine if I were to build a screening test. Okay. How many people do I need to test before I can go to the FDA or Health Canada and say, look, I have a test that works? If the prevalence is so low that in every 1,000 people I test, maybe I get one positive case, then I have to test thousands and thousands of people, right? For clinical trial costs, that sucks, because I have to now recruit so many people. My clinical trial costs go high. And then there's also clinical utility. Okay, you have a test that tells you have cancer, but then what do you do with it, right? So there are all sorts of questions that are safeguards or rail guards around answering some of those questions. So screening, while it's a really, really important area, maybe to enter the market, it's got the huge, like the maximum market size, because obviously more healthy people exist than sick people. But it's just the barrier to entry is very high from clinical trial costs, from FDA perspective, and so on. And so it's a more of a public health issue than a medical oncology. Versus if I focus more on, let's say, cancer survivors, who are also healthy people, but they're more at risk, more prevalence. And it's a growing market, by the way, because now people are aging more, there are better treatment options, there's screening options now growing. It's not optimum, but there still are. That army of cancer survivors is sort of the next war on this front line, I would think. Like this is really, really a growing population. Like 20 million cancer survivors exist in North America, and they need frequent surveillance. Right? Sometimes as early as 3 months in the initial years. So building a test for them, because I feel like they are the neglected population. Like nobody's really thinking about them. So that's where I would like to focus, because I feel like as myself being the first user for this test, in fact, we have done a lot of our own DNA testing. Like we do that, right? So I would love to have a test for those people who are at high risk. So that's where I'm entering the market. That reduces the clinical size of the cohort that you have to test, because prevalence is higher. Your FDA class goes down. So regulatory wise, it's lower. So those kinds of things are things I've learned. And then just talking to clinicians and other key opinion leaders in the field and stakeholders to see where they find the best need for this kind of test. That's what I'm exploring at this point. Like having good science only goes a long way. Commercialization is a whole new beast that I'm learning about.
There's a bunch of stories lately around increasing cancer diagnosis rates in younger people.
Yes.
Which is, do you see that as a potential market? It's just even just to say, like I'm going back to the PSA test, which you pay for, like an additional pay test you could get at a Life Lab.
Yes. So it's interesting you say that, because I was just having a conversation with another founder today, and she said, reimbursement folks, like people who, like payers, love for you to do early detection in younger people, because then they pay them premium for a longer time, right? You save people early. Like if somebody's really close to death, okay, and you try to save them. I mean, it's purely a business. I'm sorry to say this, but clinical realm is more business than we would like to believe. And the truth is, if you have a younger person and you save their lives, they become your customers for the longest time. So that's one more channel besides the clinicians and so on, which has a more business sense of doing this. But purely from a human perspective, I think, sure. I mean, we have tested younger people, and we find our test works on them. And why would we leave out that segment, right? It's a growing problem. And there's I think a 10x cost of when cancers get detected late, right? That has a huge impact on the healthcare system. I mean, one can go and do all the health economics, but there's a huge benefit of detecting things early. So if you're young, you're carrying that cancer signal in you, and you're not getting detected, it's really a failure of the system.
Kind of talking about the system, there's two systems that you're dealing with right now, which is Health Canada and the FDA in the States. How are you finding that? Because a lot of times we talk to health tech startups or med tech startups, and usually they're in the States already and they're working on, getting approved in Canada. How are you finding that as you're doing your research and testing?
Look, I'll be honest. I have been focusing mostly on the US market because it's more mature for these types of tests. That's where the ecosystem for these kinds of tests exists. Also, the clinical uptake. I think people are just more, I think the system allows it. They want more companies, more technologies to compete with each other. They're high risk. And that's where the investors are too. So I think for me, just looking at the commercial landscape, I feel US is where I have put my most focus in, because I feel like I'll get the maximum traction there. But people are people, cancer is cancer, right? So in terms of running clinical trials and anything like that, I think Canada is a great place as well. But it's a complex healthcare system that I, as an immigrant, am also trying to understand. Like I have lived in the US. That's where I did my PhD. I've lived in Europe. I did my postdoc from there. I went back to India, lived there for the longest time, and now I'm back in Canada. So I've lived across various health systems. No health system is perfect. But considering here in Canada that I'm still trying to understand the WHIP system. Even the genetic tests, for example, are not, they are, I learned that they are done in special labs. Not every lab can do genetic tests for a province. So if one province, for example, here in Ontario, maybe that region would be Hamilton, like all the health sciences and all that Hamilton area does all the genetic testing for the entire state. That's not how it works in the US. Different labs can have genetic tests. You also have to get approvals and stuff like that, but there's no sort of limitations of this kind. So I feel like there's just more to navigate in Canada that I'm not doing at the moment. I'm just focusing on the US because just that the ecosystem is much richer in that part of the region. Yeah, that part.
Sounds like an interprovincial trade barrier.
A barrier indeed. And it sounds like there's been no shortage of challenges that you've been working to overcome and have overcome, especially your journey, your education, your background, your years of experience in multiple countries. What has that experience been like for you, and how did that even shape your journey as a founder?
Well, see, I took a risk. I left my tenured faculty position and started this company. The fact that I had the courage to move at the age of 41 to a completely new country, start with getting the driver's license again, like literally uprooting my life and rebooting it in a new country. I think that comes with a lot of exposure to different cultures and just the sheer fact that you can live in a new place because you get that courage because you've done that early on. So, in fact, my husband also has a startup. So we have two
startup family.
Two startups at home, and I have a daughter, and she's probably learning this indirectly, like how to do this. But what we did, just as a side is like people buy homes, people buy nice cars. My husband sold his second startup and we made money on that. This was during COVID time. And when we moved to Canada, this was just around the time we moved to Canada in 2020. And he sold his company in 2021. And we just put that money and invested it. And literally we have 3 salaries now. One from, I get like a very poor salary. Like my husband is earning through his startup. And then this third salary, which is coming from all the cash that we did not utilize to buy a home. So we kind of we have 3 salaries, but that keeps us going, right? So we made certain choices very consciously early on, whereas everybody said, don't do this, why are you doing this? And I said, we're just entrepreneurial in general, my husband and I. So yeah, we took this. So I think a lot of it probably somehow comes from that, like, if you believe in yourself, we won't die hungry. Like we'll be able to do something, right? That's the belief I go by. And the rest I just leave up to God, just to faith.
Some tough choices along the way, but it seems like it's all paying off. And you're based in Kitchener, right?
I live in Toronto, but the lab is in Kitchener, yes.
So what do you think of the local tech ecosystem here? How has that influenced your journey and your company and your team?
Because you're across the street, right?
I'm across the street.
Yes.
I
should say that. Across the street is Velocity for people who are listening to this. I have no idea where I'm pointing. I'm also pointing in the wrong direction.
I get confused too.
We need to get Alex a compass in here.
I'm in the right direction.
It's
I was right. I was totally right.
Right.
I know where it is.
So Velocity is home. I think what I find is the biggest strength about Canada is its people. The founder energy and the talent I have found in Canada is unparalleled. Like best employees, best advisors, all of that mentorship, a lot of that I attribute a lot to Velocity, Communitech, and any other program I've been a part of. I feel like that part is really solid. The risk-taking appetite for early-stage companies can be better in Canada. I think there's more non-dilutive capital to be put in, and I'm not the only one saying that. I think this has been said multiple times. You have to be, so I've actually become mature. It's many of these non-dilutive grants want you to be at least 2 years incorporated, and I just passed that mark. Yeah. So I'm very
2
happy.
days ago, yeah.
I know. So I'm just saying, I think they just need to believe more in people so that they don't go down south looking for capital, looking for market. I think just having that confidence, because human capital is great here. I think the founder energy is really, really good. The ecosystem is good. I wish I lived closer, closer to where I work, because traveling up and down from Toronto is just not feasible. But just my financial side, my family side of things doesn't allow me to do that. So I'm just kind of stuck.
I drove on the 401 yesterday and today, and
it's tiring.
I'm zonked. I went to bed at 9 o'clock last night.
I do that.
And why does Toronto and Aurora have to be so far away?
I know. And that's what happens. So I try to minimize my travel. I just have really good employees who I really trust to do the tech. And I just do all the business development from home, and I come when I need to. And so that's been serving me well.
Making it work.
Well, the one thing we're going to talk about ecosystem-wise too is you were a graduate of Fierce Founders here, but you were a virtual graduate. So what was that like? Kind of what was the program like for you? And then also, what's it like kind of doing it virtually?
Yeah, so I've actually been a Fierce Founder. I've been in 2 programs of Fierce Founder. Okay. I think there are 3 in total.
There are 3 in total.
Yes, so I've done the first 2, both virtual. I actually like the virtual format because you save time on going up and down. And the program itself was virtual, but the mentors or mentorship that came through the programs, they were kind of hybrid, because I would meet certain mentors and, for coffee. In fact, in Communitech, so I have one mentor I've been working with for the longest time, and he's the sweetest person. Bruce Brown, if you're listening, he's been such a great cheerleader for what we're doing, helping me along the way. So I think through Fierce Founder, knowing peer-to-peer, like what people are going through, has not helped me personally that much, because there's not a lot of people working in the area that I am. But so the challenges are kind of different. They're not always aligned, but the mentorship I've gotten through this program is just phenomenal.
Yeah, the mentorship's like one of those things where you don't, if you've never had a good mentor, you don't know what you're missing. And then once you do have a good mentor or good mentors, then you're like, I need this all the time.
Exactly. And I think when you jump into a new area, especially when I did, I just did not realize how tough this would be. Honestly, like I just did not realize how tough this would be because, you know, you're always excited about science, but science is such a small element of building a company. It's just all these things you need to understand and build and have, and then worrying about the cash and all of that. I think it just comes with, you need people to support you, right? Without that support, you'll be lost. So I feel like somebody who has done this before, who is talking to other founders and gives you a reality check saying, it's okay, you know, it's fine. That support is needed. It doesn't have to be always technical or commercial. It just could be like, you know, you're just using them as a sounding board to say, look, or ranting. That's what I do many times. I think that's really helped with the Fierce Founders. But just making those connections, especially because I come from outside, right? I don't know anybody. But being part of these programs, I see the same companies going through different kinds of programs. So I keep bumping into these people. So just the familiarity aspect, and that's really helped, I feel, with these programs.
Looking back on when you started all of this, so when you started Asima Health, is there anything that you would say to yourself 2 years ago that you kind of wish you knew then?
A lot. I would say a lot of things. One is don't get into this field because it's super tough. Biotech, like I was telling Alex before we started this podcast, you know, diagnostics has always been the poor cousin in biopharma, which is really sad, right? Because prevention, as we know, is always one of those things that, you know, like what did you say? Prevention
an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly. So that's something that it's so common sense, but still we don't see the kind of research money or the kind of investments going into diagnostics. So it's just a very tough space to be in. I think it got a lot of traction during COVID time, 2021. You see a spike in all this investment and so on. But since 23 onwards, it's been a tough market to raise. So just with so much happening, I probably would have, my commercial side of things would have said, don't jump into a field, which is so hard to do. But the science part of it, which is what keeps me alive, is probably I would have still gotten into it. So I feel like because there is so much impact, and especially because what I know is where I can make the most impact in a field which is really, really necessary, I don't think I would have done it any other way. Because, I'm doing things as I would have done as a faculty, raising money, managing teams, doing research. So I don't see anything different, but it's a very tough field. And as a single founder, brown woman sitting in Canada, it's not been easy. Like, you know, things are stacked against you, but it's fine. Like I'm enjoying the ride and I just don't think about it too much. I just say, you know, enjoy the ride and hopefully something will come out of it.
Well, I feel like we should have you back on the 3rd anniversary of the business. A year from
if
now.
It survives.
That's what I'm putting it out there right now. We'll have you back on year 3. We'll do our follow-up and see what happens. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much and good luck.
Thank you. Bye.
And thank you for listening to Tech About Town, brought to you by Communitech and Elevate IP. I heard on the chat thing, the fake Slack, that Elevate IP new cohort. I call Google Chat fake Slack.
Fake Slack.
It's fake Slack. I saw on fake Slack that applications are open for the next cohort of Elevate IP. So we'll have that in the episode description. And as always, if you have any questions about what Communitech can do for you or your company, you can visit communitech.ca, get connected with a bunch of people, or you can follow along on the adventure on Instagram, X, Facebook, LinkedIn, all that at Communitech on all the major social platforms. And thanks again for listening.
Thanks for listening.